Listen to that sound. There's some things in the world that stay consistent, and that introduction music is one of them. It's so lovely to have you all here today. Thank you already for putting in the chat where you're watching from. If you haven't already, do say hello in the chat feature, and don't forget to say where you're coming from and how you're feeling today as well. Would love to know how everyone is. It's so lovely to have you here. And at Wednesday at 2 o'clock, for those of you who are the OGs in the marketing meetup, you'll know that that has some spiritual significance to the marketing meetup. It's when we used to send our newsletter every week. So it's always good to come back to Wednesday at 2 and come back that way. As ever, and by the way, Hannah, just summing it up already in the chat feature saying, hello, you lovely lot. Please keep that up. It's so lovely to see all these messages. So the first challenge for today, I'll level 2 at you. The first is to keep that chat feature buzzing throughout today's session. And particularly, because this is Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I appreciate that chances are that a lot of you will be watching and possibly doing something else. So my challenge for you is for at least this hour to sort of zoom in on this session and really engage with it, because I really think that's where we're going to be getting the most from it all. So do keep that chat feature buzzing throughout, and don't forget to also switch your messages to everyone, so everyone can see your messages, not just host and panelists, which only means Sam and I would be able to see your messages. Secondly, second challenge, I would love to see your biggest takeaway on social media today. Of course, if you're off social media this week, completely understandable. Blimey, it's been so hard to sort of, see where we all are, but hopefully today's session will help, and hopefully today's session will help in a very human, meaningful way. And with all that said, if you want to share on social media after today's session, it would be truly appreciated. We can continue to support helping and support more people that way. So, with those 2 challenges in mind, let's get on with the introduction. And today I am so excited. I confessed to Sam the other day that I was a fan of his way before we had the opportunity to do this talk. In fact, I got distinct memories of painting my fence out in the garden one day, listening to Sam's book, Be More Pirate. Sam has a CV and a LinkedIn profile as long as my arm and leg and body, which means to say that he's a presenter of At Uncertainty Experts, author of the incredible book Be More Pirate, co-founder of Levity, collaborator with Channel 4 and Netflix. Honestly, the list goes on. It's really quite something special. I have to say, I'm just really, really excited to have him speaking with us today. But really, the reason for my admiration for Sam is that he thinks differently. He doesn't accept the norm, and in fact, he seems to really love sort of embracing different. For my mind, at least, these are the people that drive the world forward. And I know that there's a bunch of them in the marketing meetup community too. So I think you're going to absolutely love Sam today. Today, Sam's speaking about something that feels important in the context of today, which is generally and more specifically about uncertainty and how to manage it. That's what the presentation is about, so I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Sam in just a moment. Today will function as a presentation and then a Q&A. So don't forget to get your questions in to use the Q&A feature. The way you do that is wiggling your mouse or finding your app, find the Q&A feature and drop your questions in there. Sam's going to be breezing through today, and then we're hopefully going to leave some time for questions at the end. And in fact, he said that we can carry on beyond the hour if we'd like to. So that seems like a really great opportunity to really have a great discussion in the Q&A as well. Finally, before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors for today, who are Redgate Software. Redgate are a wonderful company who I used to work in the building of. They used to give us loads of bacon. It was a good time. With all that said, they're looking to hire right now, and they've been a phenomenal support as the marketing meetup. They pay well. They're a great culture, great company. If you're looking to work in the software space, I really don't think you can look anywhere better as a marketer. So do take the time to check out Redgate Software. Also, a big thank you to Content Square, Hrefs, Impression, Content Cal, Fiverr, Redgate, Cambridge Marketing College, Brand Recruitment, Gravity Global, and Third Light. We'll mention each of those as featured sponsors in future weeks. I just want to say, before I hand over to Sam, thank you so much for already keeping that chat feature alive. And I can see your chat messages coming in about fish finger sandwiches. And that's lovely. I love to know how people are watching. So let's get going with today's session. And Sam, it's over to you, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much for having me, and full respect for everyone on the fish finger sandwich front, one of my all-time favourite lunches. I've got the chat open as well, and a special prize for anyone who can derail me along the way with a difficult question or challenge. And I mean it. I've been working on uncertainty for the last year and a half. This week feels somewhat different from other weeks. So whilst I'm not going to offer political or geopolitical opinions, I'm going to draw from some of the stuff I've learned that has been most useful to me. But if anyone does want to stick around for a little bit afterwards and get into that, then I'm more than happy to. Feels like a time to talk. Hello, Tom. Nice to meet you too. Nice to see you again too. Righty-ho. Oh, and the other thing is I've got quite a lot to say, and I've just been preparing it right up until now because I got really excited at the invitation from Joe, so I'm undoubtedly going to say too much and talk too fast, but I reckon you're a smart bunch, so you can listen quickly. Still peaking a touch on the audio. Look, Joe's on my sound check at the side here, so I'll just do that. It's because I get excited, Joe, but I can see there's a little red light, so when that's working, there we go. So uncertainty, let's define it so that we know what we're talking about. Doubt, probably feeling quite a bit of it. Skepticism, undoubtedly, we're all familiar with that. The sense of suspicion, yes, absolutely. Mistrust, one of the formal definitions. A lack of sureness, well, something that we all need to get used to, and probably everyone in an agency perspective always has. But ultimately, my key definition for the uncertainty is the unknown. That's how we can sum it up. And of course, there are different people experiencing different types of uncertainty. I already mentioned that I think we can't have this conversation without some kind of reference to the situation in Ukraine. So just in absolute solidarity and awareness of the real level of uncertainty so many people are going through there, I just want to name check it. And we'll come back to it. But there are different ways of looking at uncertainty. There is, of course, the world uncertainty, and there is a new world uncertainty index which suggests that uncertainty is at its highest rate ever, and that's broadly drawn from the sciences of the science of economics. But there's also another measure of uncertainty which I particularly like if I'm ever feeling too optimistic, which is the atomic doomsday clock, which is an international panel of scientists who judge how close we are to our own extinction brought on by our own events. So it's usually around somewhere between nuclear war, climate crisis, AI, or a man-made pandemic. And they've currently got us closer to midnight than we've ever been in our history. So there's different ways of looking at uncertainty, but I don't want to get too hung up on the negatives of uncertainty. I want to get onto the positives and the exciting perspectives. Now, any of you who've done any kind of work in this area, any kind of leadership development or even business planning may well have seen uncertainty phrased in this lineup. The VUCA world was first coined at the end of the Cold War when military officials were trying to learn to plan in an ever uncertain world. And they came up with this kind of framework, and it has its uses. However, I'd say it's a little out of date, principally for this reason, that uncertainty is the only one of those things that we feel. I mean, you can feel volatile, of course, but it's not an emotion. And uncertainty is something that we as human beings are hardwired to feel, and to feel really deeply. Everyone experiences it in different ways. My kind of shorthand of uncertainty would be that, but it's not what we always think or term it as. Uncertainty is absolutely not risk. And depending on where in the world you work, risk and probability assessments will be part of what the work we have to do. But it's not risk. Risk is dealing with known knowns. It's an assessment of the likely outcome of known scenarios. It's also not reforecasting, which again, we will all know. The world changes, budget changes, briefs change, and circumstances mean that we have to design in an agile way. But reforecasting is also working within knowns. It is certainly not resilience, something that's become very important over the last year and a half, a skill that people rely upon every single day. But resilience is almost, in a way, getting good at getting hit. And whilst that's good for a while, I worry sometimes, especially in some of the instances I've heard of, that by investing or spending too much time and attention on resilience, we end up putting the onus or the responsibility for uncertainty on the individuals. And it comes down to us increasing our own resilience to strengthen the organizations we're in. And that's not right. So I think uncertainty stands alone. In fact, I know uncertainty stands alone. And there's a reason for it. In a post-resilience world where I think we now need to get good as a result of the uncertainty that's good to come, rather than just get better at taking blows. Yeah, it is a PlayStation controller. It's fun, isn't it? I can move the slides with my PlayStation controller. I can do silly things. I can make myself disappear. I can come back like this. And I'll tell you how I've done it. But anyway, for now, that's not where we're going. I want to tell you why uncertainty is the potential answer, even though it's pretty uncomfortable. And it's for a measurable and very specific thing called uncertainty tolerance. Uncertainty tolerance is developed in the 1980s. It's a measurable trait, and it's when they realized, psychologists, that uncertainty sits at the root of all anxiety disorder. So there is an aspect to all of our feelings of anxiety that are triggered by this response that we all feel to uncertainty. Now, there's something really interesting in this. I've learned a lot about neuroscience over the last year and a half. If you put an EEG scanner, I've got one here, onto the brain, it lights up in exactly the same way. An EEG measures and monitors blood flow around the brain, so it's quite reliable. The brain lights up exactly the same way in fear, and it does as it does for excitement. And so there is this direct correlation between these two states that uncertainty puts us in, one that leads us to anxiety and one that leads us to creativity. I can further back this up, and we're going to look into this in a little bit more detail. But the opportunity for us is those of us with a low uncertainty tolerance have a higher recourse to divisiveness, self-doubt, indecision, fatigue, impressionability, and anxiety. And it's been measured in multiple different ways. So low uncertainty tolerance in extremist circumstances, you have higher recruitment levels. People are more likely to fall for populist ideology. People are more likely to fall for conspiracy theories, fake news, the shares on social media. Everything that Cambridge Analytica looked at took into account this particular measure. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, people with a high uncertainty tolerance are better at collaboration. They can sit for longer with problems with ambiguous, open-ended endings. They have greater abilities at decisiveness. They can stay with problems longer. They have improved sense of judgment and open-mindedness. In terms of skills for us as marketeers, you can see that high uncertainty tolerance can be a bit of a game changer. And the opportunity in this kind of like red pill, blue pill moment, because everybody is affected by uncertainty in one of these ways, is that uncertainty tolerance is a malleable trait. We can increase it as well as it can be decreased. And chances are, right now, this week, we are feeling a lower uncertainty tolerance. It is absolutely subjective to external events. I've put about 10,000 people through the uncertainty tolerance test so far, and I'm going to give you a link. You can take it for free as well. I've created 4 quartiles. Well, I haven't. I've been working with the Brain Sciences Laboratory at London's UCL, specifically with their decision-making and uncertainty lab. And at the moment, the majority of people will fall into the low uncertainty category, with very, very few having super high uncertainty tolerance skills. And so it shows there is this great skill, a measurable trait, really identified across science, that sits between our anxiety, exhaustion, fatigue, stuckness of the last couple of years. And if we exercise it, it gives us incredible skills that are very, very relevant to all of us. No, it's not the technical term for resilience. It's a good question. Resilience is very different. Resilience is a measure and it sits within what we do, but resilience is an ability to respond to anxiety and stress and crisis. Uncertainty tolerance is somewhat different altogether. It's part of your more like your autonomic responses. We're going to get into a little bit more definition of it, and you'll see why. And I would argue, just on that question, that whilst resilience has been an essential trait for the last year and a half, if we're really going to get good at morphing our businesses and coming up with the solutions we don't yet have to problems that we know we're going to face, it's uncertainty tolerance that is going to allow for that, because it's both a cognitive trait that allows us to think differently, as well as our emotional response to it. Now, talking of emotional responses, that was just a quick dive into some of the science that I've learned, and we're going to come back to aspects of this science, but I don't want this to be a leadership talk or predominantly academic or a school-based lecture. I want this to be about you. So I'm going to ask you to try something with me. This is something else I've been experimenting with, along with PlayStation controllers, and trying to present differently. Would you please get out your phones? I know this technology needs no explanation. If you've been to a pub in the last 12 months, we all know exactly what it is. So I'd like you to answer some questions as we go along now. I'm going to introduce you to who I'm calling the uncertainty experts, and they're going to prompt you for some reflections, and your phone will open up some questions on a type form that I've built just for today. You'll see what they are, and we'll just check that it's all working. The QR code will bring up the first question. It says hello, so please put your name in. Hello, Nicole. Hello, Ella. Hello, Joe. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Susie. Hello, Nicole, whatever your name is. Hello, Sam. Don't put in hello, Sam, unless your name's Sam. And then it's going to ask you how you're feeling. And then it's going to ask you how you're thinking. And the reason I've asked you those two questions is twofold. One, no one is going to see these questions. They're not to be intellectualized. There's no smart thinking required. This is a lunchtime instinctive response. And what we're going to try and get to is the intelligence that sits between what we're thinking and what we're feeling, because it is key and shown to be key in navigating uncertainty. If we just stay in our heads in uncertainty, if we just stay in our emotions, we will not be at our best ability to navigate through uncertainty. If we can engage in both, we'll have a better chance. Once you've answered those two questions, it's going to say, wait for it. So when we do that, please wait for it, because I want to show you a story. I want to show you a bit of the science that's behind it, and then I'm going to ask you to reflect. And if we do that together, hopefully the combined effect of these reflections will give you all a bit of a toolkit that in 42 minutes you can take away into the rest of this very disturbing week. As Ella says, it's been giving us feelings like butterflies, but not nice feelings. Yeah, I guess that's dangerous uncertainty. It absolutely is. And we'll come back to the exact name for that feeling and why it's caused in that way, Ella, and a technique you can use to manage it. So when you've got the wait for it signal, wait for it. Seems to me like you're all really smart and everyone's got it, right? You've got your phones open, you've done the first questions. There's a nod from Joe, he seems on, and the chat is quiet. So good. Yep, all done. Thank you, Nicole. Right, great. So here we go into the next bit. This is the kind of the story then of what I've been working on. This uncertainty headline seems to have kind of dominated everywhere. You can't move without seeing it, and there's some pretty terrifying ones. My favorite one is the easy part is over. Get out. That was the Financial Times just a few days ago, just kind of giving us a sense of where we are. And you know, they were talking about COVID, and in the last 2 weeks, that's not even the primary cause of our uncertainty. So we are into a new stage, an uncertainty that has both economic, financial, human, emotional, and very scary historical implications. And that's why we go back to this specific feeling of uncertainty, a stuckness, a frustration, and as Ella described it, almost a sickness, and that's because it's a dissonance. The reason for this is autonomic, and autonomic is a word I had never heard before all this work, and it's beyond your options of choice. It's not even automatic. Here's your systems. It sits at your deepest amygdala, the ancient brain level that we shared with all the kind of early pro-sapiens before we developed this amazing ability for creative thought at the front of our heads. And everyone knows the fight or flight mechanism. You know, that's A-level science. What very few people know is those two Fs don't capture our full 7 autonomic responses to uncertainty or threat. And we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, feed, or fuck. That is the limited palette that we as human beings were designed with in response to uncertainty and threat. And so obviously that is a limited response when you've arrived in 2022 and the expectation, the norm is becoming extremes of weather that are life-threatening. A level of migration that's going to put the last 6 million refugees over the Syrian crisis. 50 million refugees are expected as a result of the shifts that climate change has already gone past a point of no return around. And that's in a world where the traditional paradigms of leadership that have led us through uncertain times have gone to a very, very different place. You know, the trust in our leaders, I can't even lean out the way to demonstrate how low that's gone. And just at the point we thought we were getting our heads or moving out of one crisis, we move into another crisis. And this is going to be the norm for quite some while. That's why the doomsday clock sits where it is. All of the predictions will argue that things are in such a state of flux. There isn't any stability to bring them up, and there is no global or consensual leadership, anything that there has been in the last 50 years of history. So there is a real question that adds to this fear, this sense of no one being in charge, there not being a master plan, and no one coming to save us. And that's disturbingly true. You know, we don't have consensual political structures or international infrastructural structures, only really economics. And you know, the expectation of market failure is higher than the expectation that the market won't fail. So we have to go into some kind of further uncertainty than the one we're in. And that's why we have to be prepared for it. And I know that's really scary, and I'm definitely not here to be scary. We're going to get into the positive things that we can do about it. Yeah, I fear most for my children too. I fear most for yeah, we'll get back into the fears, but I don't want to dwell in the fears. I want to get us into some practical tools that we can do about it. So whilst we're currently framing the world as such and being honest about what we're facing, I'd like to ask you all a question about your own agency and ability. Please turn back to your phones and use the type form. If you scroll backwards, if you've missed it or anything, the previous questions will be there. Type form's quite good like that. And could you rate your current ability at turning this perilous uncertainty that we face into opportunity? How do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being no problem, I've got this, I can see all of the business opportunities, the brand opportunities, the personal development opportunities, how I'm going to sail through this. And 0 being not a fucking chance. Or as Alexandra says, glass of wine, anyone? Good response. And as Nicole spilled, make it a bottle. Yes, exactly. I think that's how we feel. So on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you put your abilities at turning uncertainty into opportunity? Okay, and then wait for it. And now I'm going to introduce you to the journey that I've been on this 18 months and the advice around tackling uncertainty, the stories and the science around tackling uncertainty that I've heard. So my particular dive into uncertainty began here. This is 3 years ago. This was actually that little bit of hair just there is me as the chief exec of Livity, the agency that I started 20 years ago, and has really been the predominant, my experience in the world of marketing, and an agency that just was taken on by the Mission Group just yesterday, and was one of the absolute highlights of my life. Purpose-driven brands and marketing, working for some of the biggest brands in the world, and working with some of the most disadvantaged communities in the world. However, at the end of my journey there, I got pretty frustrated and left wondering about the changing world that we're in, and as people who'd set out to try and change the world, worrying that some of the changes that we'd tried to affect hadn't happened. And that was what led me to writing my book. A book about rule breaking, a book about really challenging the status quo, because it felt to me that purpose in and of itself and social innovation in and of itself wasn't going to be enough when it's structural change that's required. So I wrote a book about challenging structural change based on the golden age of pirates. I launched it by fly posting my publishers and nearly getting nicked for it. And it took me into a whole new world, whole new career, whole new period of my life, which was great because at the time my life was falling apart a little bit. I'd only known Livity for nearly 2 decades up until that point. I started it when I was 20, so it was really a massive part of my identity. I was getting divorced, which was a great tragedy in my life. These 2 small children and the ex-love of my life, even going through it in a very friendly way. And this new fluidity and flexibility of the life as an author and public speaking and events both fit that life really well and was something that I found incredibly difficult, but it was just starting to go really, really well. But that was a business model that relied on traveling around the world and being in rooms full of people and breathing on them, which in March 2020 was a business model that kind of fell apart. And I found myself staring at these 2, as everybody did, falling between none of the kind of furlough schemes or anything else, but this incredibly high level of domestic responsibilities, because we just completed a separation arrangement that allowed us to kind of stay as a family across 2 houses. And I was fucked. And very, very rapidly went into significant debt and found myself near insolvency at the end of that year. And as I kept looking to these individuals, it was the kind of pseudo strategy and pseudo science and the inability of leadership to be able to say it just doesn't know what to do that I found so frustrating and couldn't get what I needed from this level of leadership. And I started turning back to the young people that I knew through Livity, to the inspirational young people who taught me so much on my journey with Livity. And in particular, I could see such, resilience, strength, imagination, courage in response to the changes that were going on in particular groups, the refugee groups of young people I'd worked with, the ex-offenders that I'd worked with. So kind of the guys who've been at the extremes. And there was one conversation that changed my outlook altogether. This is Carl. As a young man, Carl went to prison, and he's such an articulate and thoughtful individual. He wrote a book called A Survival Guide to Prison. And it was great, and I used it many, many times working with other groups of young people. And Carl gave me a piece of advice as I kind of sought it that really stopped me in my tracks. And I'll just give you a brief glimpse of Carl being incredible and articulate and inspiring, just to kind of set the tone.
Prison just exacerbates your pre-existing problems. If you're overly macho, it concretes that character trait. If you're vulnerable, you will be victimized. If you're a drug addict, you'll find further drugs. And if you're an extremist, you will not learn to like the system when you're at the sharp end of the most dysfunctional element.
So Carl learnt languages, wrote a book, and really, for me, became somewhat of a philosopher whilst in prison, and then went on to become a reform activist and do incredible things in the world. What he introduced me to was a couple of concepts. Now, somebody on the chat just mentioned a moment ago something called negativity bias, something I'd never heard of. And it's the brain's predetermined bias towards negative assumptions. And it's, you know, just part of the brain's natural ability and desire to protect us. And it used to be assumed that it was a 1 in 10 ratio. So that would mean of every 10 opportunities that came your way, your brain would safely assume that one of them was probably okay, and it would put a negativity bias on the others, that they might be threatening, risky, make you look bad, or something. And, you know, understandably so, this is to protect us. The brain is not interested in creativity or making you look good. It's just interested in keeping you alive. And so this requires an awful lot of work to overcome. Psychologists assume that negativity bias during the pandemic went up to 201. So 200 opportunities, one of them, the brain might go, that looks safe. And if you extrapolate that across a day, that means there's about less than 15 minutes where you'd be feeling kind of good about the world, like things are going to be okay. And the rest of the time, this ingrained bias beginning to push negativity into all of our thoughts and assumptions. So the way that Carl taught me to overcome this was something that he called the time between tides. It sounds pretty philosophical, but once he explained it, it was this kind of liminal space. And, you know, everyone's experiences, whether it's like in the shower or in travel, it's whether you're into meditation or into taking walks, it's not on anyone's agenda. You know, like reflection is not on anyone's to-do list unless you're a mirror. But, you know, we know how important it is, but we never ever get there. And in speaking to Carl, it was just so profound. He's like, how do you expect to learn the lessons of what's going on around you if you do not use the most powerful processing thought process you have? And it just stopped me in my tracks. How on earth am I going to make sense of this, watching the rolling news or doom scrolling social media, unless I develop my own perspectives, even if I don't get to an outcome? The processing of it all as human beings changes it all, rather than keeping it in that default mode network or the negativity bias. What's going to go wrong here? Getting some depth with it. So I went from thinking, what's Carl talking about the time between tides, to doing some of the deepest reflection of my life, which allowed me to begin to frame and then manage the panic that I was having on a daily basis. Otherwise, I was, you know, deeply anticipating, making plans for having to move out of this house, and oh God, I mean, even move back in with my ex, which we laughed about at the time, but bloody hell, it all got really fucking close. So with that part of the story in mind, I'll ask you to reflect for a second to the next question that will be there on your phones. How much does this relate to CBT? Oh, it's a very good question, Neil Brady. I'll come back to that in a moment. But for now, I'll ask all of you to put this into context. If you knew, as Carl taught me by explaining to me both his experience and the neuroscience of it, that the one thing you could do that would enable you to better spot opportunity amongst all this scary uncertainty, and it was deep reflection, what would you do to make it a daily practice? Because as Helen says, it's really, really bloody hard. Yeah, and I do have some techniques, but I'll come back to that. But I'm just going to shut up for a second so that you can think about it from your end. Because chances are, instinctively, everybody knows when they've been in that space before. So what is it that you could do that allows you back into that occasional time between tides? Yeah, Sarah, the numbers in the text might have got slightly changed because I was rushing to get this all ready because I was trying to make the interactivity work for you guys and trying to think about the right questions for today. So go with whatever question is on your phone. Don't trust me to get the copyright. It's different but similar. There, thank you. And there was probably typos as well. Mine was walking. When Carl said to me, and I realize it, and I've always used walking to get my head straight, but walking with intention, not walking listening to music, going out with a question in my mind. The one in the presentation is easier to understand than the one on your phone. That's because I was rushing when I was trying to write it. That's where the typos were there as well, Hannah. I'm sorry. But time's up. Bear with me. I'm giving you deliberately a short amount of time to answer these questions because we're trying to practice answering things with our instincts, with answers that we already know. Okay, so what happened to me now was Carl is a neuroscience enthusiast and he had begun to share with me why this worked. And so I decided to try and get some like scientific understanding behind all of this. And I discovered a remarkable woman called Catherine Templar-Lewis. She is both neuroscientist and behavioral psychologist. She's the only person I've ever met who's got 3 masters. She came top of her entire year at Oxford doing human sciences. She's an incredible woman. And she'd also been looking at uncertainty and the impacts of uncertainty going through the pandemic. So she was really excited by some of the stories that I was beginning to uncover, and we began to work together. Catherine delving into the scientific research, the knowledge. She's affiliated with UCL, Goldsmiths, and many others. So she began to give me some like robust evidence behind some of these early insights that I was beginning to form. So I can take a story from ex-prisoner, you know, we can give you some inspiration about the benefits of reflection, but then let's turn to Catherine, who can then back this up with some evidence and some research. Here's a brief glimpse of Catherine.
So one of my favorite studies in the sort of thousands of papers and studies that we waded through and translated for this project was by a behavioral economist in the 80s called Tetlock. And he got 248 experts and got them over 20 years to try and predict the future. He got over 27,000 predictions to see if they were right. And what he found is that none of them, right, as a whole set of experts, they weren't any better at predicting the future than a random algorithm. But interestingly, if you pull out individuals, a couple of them were really good at it. And he tried to work out why, what was the correlation? And he thought it might be confidence and success. But actually, those who were more successful and confident had worse predictions because they had loads of ego. And if you have loads of ego, you basically don't like cognitive dissonance, and you don't like accepting new perspectives or ideas. They were rubbish at uncertainty. The people who were really good at making predictions of uncertainty were the people who actually had the least ego, who were humble, who were curious, and who saw it as an opportunity. And it was that ability to sort of be open-minded, to, as Ming says, violate stereotypes, to accept new ideas, that actually made them much better at predicting the future uncertainty than any of the other experts.
So here's another question for you. And Neil Brady's pointing out that there's some correlation here with mindfulness techniques. And yes, there's absolutely very, very clear evidence from scans as well as qualitative research that prolonged mindfulness can activate certain brainwaves. I can't remember whether they're alpha, theta, or beta. But they're connected to this. I touched on the default mode network. It's the seat of ego or sense of self. And the lower our ego is, or the more open-minded we are, these studies found that you would all assume it was the most confident and clear leaders, but actually those better at predicting outcomes in uncertainty were the most humble and the most open-minded. Now, yeah, humble and curious. And that was what allowed them to see opportunity in uncertainty, which I think is counterintuitive to who we'd think is going to be best in uncertainty. So the question is back at you. And again, the number is probably wrong on the screen. So it's the next one on your phone that comes up. And the question is very simply, you are all open-minded people, but we vary. In moments like this week, we are less open-minded because our uncertainty tolerance has probably decreased. And so we tend to reach for our phone, listen to the news, even though it's the same headline. We spend less time in that space. So when are you at your most open-minded? Because if you can identify that, you know when you are at your best in uncertainty. Okay. yes, Rachel, I think it is close to that kind of perspective. And because I think there is a default in leadership at the moment that everyone feels they have to be really confident and clear and strong and demonstrate a view. And it's not necessarily the case. You know, the whole point of time between tides is we have this deep intelligence within us, but it takes time to process. Now, I'm going to continue because I want to keep, I've got a few more of these questions coming to you, and I want you to reflect on these as well, because it's going to be the combined effect of them that hopefully is going to ladder you up with a perspective. So I was fascinated by what I was learning, and I did a series of other interviews with some of the ex-prisoners I know and how well they were coping. And I wrote it up and I called it Uncertainty Experts, and I didn't have any grand ambitions for this at the time. I just put it on my Medium account, and for me, it went pretty viral, like thousands of shares around the world, and I got huge amounts of responses as to how useful it had been. And so I began to question and wonder whether we were looking up at the kind of the experts and the news, and we were missing the reality of millions of people, like the 12 million people living in the UK are under the poverty threshold, or the 480,000 refugees living in the UK, or the 284,000 young people living in gangs at the moment, or any number of different marginalized groups, or people experiencing everything from mental health issues to just fucking the threat of being a woman on the street of London. I mean, there are so many different aspects of uncertainty, and why weren't we looking at those? And so I began to look deeper and deeper into this. And I found very, very quickly a very similar looking article that was also written about an experience of being in prison. It was published within a few days of the one that I'd published. And so I spoke to the author, who was a fascinating woman called Morgan Godwin. Morgan Godwin had grown up in Oregon, in Portland, in Oregon, with anxiety generally throughout her youth, and relatively normal, recognizable youth, pizza delivery and PlayStations and life. And then something terrible happened inside her family. Depression hit. She found herself very isolated and alone, and her occasional drug use increased. And then at a party, she gave a small amount of her own personal stash of drugs to one of her best friends. And very tragically, he died as a result of taking it. To be responsible in any way for the death of your best friend is pretty terrifying. Morgan was arrested and then sent to prison for 20 years for supply and manslaughter. And that was not a world that she was going to be familiar with. So a new degree of uncertainty unfolded around Morgan. But in this new world of prison, where she found herself completely out of her own depth, but surrounded by many women who didn't speak English, who weren't aware of how to get through their circumstances, with violent backgrounds, she began a new chapter of her life, and she learned languages and she learned law, and she was able to begin to help her fellow inmates in a very significant sense. She was released several years later, and she continued to be a prison reform, law and drugs activist, and she's led a landmark victory in North America for recognition of certain amounts of drugs, which will have huge consequences in terms of the opioid crisis over there. She is a force of nature, and she is going to change the world for better, and she's already changing laws and saving lives. And like all my uncertainty experts, she learned the skills of navigating uncertainty in the mainstream world as a leading light in society at her time in the shadows of uncertainty. And this began a journey for me of finding people who met this kind of dual success in uncertainty and interviewing them to look for their insights. And so I asked Morgan very specifically, and this will go back to a couple of the questions we've had about CBT, about coping strategies, how the F did someone with general anxiety anyway cope with being dropped in prison, in a violent and dangerous high security prison with a 20-year sentence? What were your techniques? So this is Morgan Godwin.
Radical acceptance is active. It takes effort. You have to really exert energy. You're not just sort of passively accepting things because they are. You are accepting things and somehow finding a way to be okay with them because they are. It is not assigning judgment. It's not saying this is good or this is bad. It is saying this is, and I accept that. It's not just sort of going throughout your day and having these sort of offhand thoughts, oh, I'm grateful for this or that. It's really sitting down and thinking and digging deep. What am I grateful for? And get to the core of it. I mean, I was so grateful for my warm blankets in jail. And I remember that now, because do my blankets ever make it on my gratitude list today? No, they don't. And why is that? Because it's exhausting to force gratitude for these things we take for granted. And so I really have to rewind, zoom out and think, I am grateful for these blankets that keep me warm.
So I've got full recordings of my interviews with Morgan, and I'll give you more stuff. I just want to give you a bit of a sense of it. So this was fascinating to me, and I've read lots about gratitude, and it's a really interesting topic anyway. But radical gratitude and being grateful for your blankets, now that didn't come within anything that I have ever read before. What on earth was going on? What was Morgan doing? And why did feeling grateful for her blankets help overcome? I mean, I can only imagine the panic of the situation that she was in. Morgan took me through it, and her interview is just as articulate and detailed and brilliant and full of humor as you'd begin to see there. And I was able now to take it to Catherine, my now neuroscientist accomplice in this work, and say, well, Catherine, how the heck does this work? Like, what happened, and what was Morgan able to do? And I'm going to show you how Catherine explained it, and then I'm going to ask you to join with me in a bit of an experiment to see if we can reconstitute it now. But quickly, we're just going to have a quick look at how Catherine explains the sympathetic nervous system response and why being gratitude for something you might take for granted actually can change your whole nervous system.
Good one. Sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. Okay, we've all heard about our nervous system, right? Which is the sort of roadways that go from our brain into our body, and they kick off when we're scared. Basically, it's what makes us produce adrenaline. It's what makes our heart beat faster. It's what makes our stomach feel like has butterflies in it. The sympathetic nervous system is exactly that. It's the side of the nervous system which goes mental when you feel afraid, and it does all those physical things to you. Problem is, it prepares you. Yeah, it's great for fight or flight, to run or to fight. But it evolved in a time when threats were really immediate. So it was like a saber-toothed tiger about to jump out at you. In this modern world, our sympathetic nervous system is triggered by everything from Instagram to, fake news. So we're permanently living in this state of high adrenaline, high cortisol, this state of permanent anxiety. And that is terrible for our physical and mental health.
So to answer the question earlier on about feeling sick, that is why. Cortisol, adrenaline, a series of chemicals are released to be able to make us fight stronger and run faster, never designed for the semi-permanent state that we're in, permanently being released. And that's why fatigue, exhaustion, this listlessness, not being able to sleep, we're deeply irregulated. So can you grab something that's around you? Something that you take for granted. Here's my Monzo card. Actually, I probably don't take that for granted. Fuck it, I do. Of course I do. If you've got something, whatever is within your grasp, a pen, I haven't got much around me, some Carmex, my glasses, something you take for granted. Okay, everyone got something? Your asthma inhaler, good one. Imran's got something. Okay, great. Now, you've just heard the science of the sympathetic nervous system. On the other side of the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is known as fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is known as rest and digest. And when that's activated, it releases a counter set of chemicals. And this is why Morgan's technique worked. She released a chemical that's known as dopamine, the reward drug. It makes you feel happy and good. And one of the easiest ways to trick, hack, convince, negotiate, manage, or influence your body to release some dopamine is if it thinks you're grateful. So, oh, wow, I'm grateful. I must be safe. Things must be good. Here's the reward drug, and everything calms down. So this is going to feel really stupid, but for 30 seconds, your mug, pencil, hot water bottle, tea kettle, Carmex, excellent, Rebecca, stare at that thing and thank the fuck out of it. Just as Morgan did. She's in prison thanking her blankets. Thank God for my blankets. So thank goodness, or whoever you would thank, for this random thing in front of you. I'm going to count 30 seconds. Go. I'm so actually really am grateful for my Monzo card, not just for your ridiculously bright colors, but because you're so useful and I'm really so shit with money, and it means that I always know where I am. So thanks. I definitely got better with control of my money since I've had you, Monzo card. In fact, you've taught me the thing, and I really like that saving mechanism thing that you've got as well. It's fucking brilliant. And I broadly like your ethics. Could be better, but on the whole, better than fucking Barclays. And oh, and I like that thing where you round up the difference. You're really, really good. Okay, so you're smiling at your bottle. Thank you for my new job. Okay, great. An online bank, a cup with my dog on. Thank it, thank it, thank it, thank it, thank it, like your life depends on it. Thank it, thank it, thank it, like getting through present is going to make. Thank it. Those of you who manage to simulate or emulate even a slight degree of gratitude, it was a role play experiment. Any of you who did, you'll have felt even the slightest shift inside you. And that means that we've all just done drugs together, which is quite fun for 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. But also you've begun to trigger, and you can see the process, and this does tip into mindfulness and CBT and many other techniques, emotional regulation. And so what I was fascinated by was someone in the prison environment who then discovered advanced emotional regulation and activation of their parasympathetic nervous system. And luckily I had Catherine to explain it all for me. And this begins to continue. I started to find uncertainty experts everywhere with the most remarkable stories. And I'm going to run out of time to tell you them all. So I'll probably just tell you Carl's, and then we'll have to skip some of the others, but I'll send you some links. Carl Loco was once on the front page of the Evening Standard, heralded as London's #1 gangster. He had a really normal upbringing, actually, was predicted grades at university. Then he saw his best friend murdered. And as a result of the trauma and anger, he got recruited by local gangs, and he's an incredibly able young man. And so ended up running the gangs until realized the error of his ways, turned his life around and started gang intervention projects. And he became very successful at getting guys out of gangs. Built on that, became quite a well-respected social entrepreneur, worked with Prince Harry, he's actually at Harry's wedding, Richard Branson advising him, and now he runs a multi-million-pound investment fund for young Black entrepreneurs. I mean, and again, just like Morgan, he used the skills he learned in uncertainty to get better in an uncertain world, a leading light in society based on lessons from the shadows. So, I really took these interviews to task, right, to really make sure that I wasn't adding, I've got a marketing background. I wasn't just adding layers of my own story on this. So I really asked Carl, could he definitely argue that there are benefits to experiencing uncertainty? And this is Carl Loco.
So for me, uncertainty is, and also it's the only place where you become more pliable and things are more pliable. When you're certain, you kind of know the formation, the pattern, you can just kind of work in a unconscious way. But there is something about uncertainty that stimulates your consciousness. So for me, it's like uncertainty, yes, is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is generating within you a heightened awareness, allowing you to see what you couldn't previously see, acknowledge what you wouldn't previously acknowledge, and that means that you can create what you couldn't previously create, because now you know more, so you can do more, you see more, so you can be more.
Yes, and that is the Liberty office. That's where I know Carl from. So here, all of a sudden, you've got this brilliantly poetic young man telling me that in uncertainty, I can be more and see more. And at first, it makes sense, this discomfort that teaches you. And I worry, it's like, am I just, being intoxicated by how articulate and poetic that Carl is? So once again, I would take these powerful words and worry that I was going to tell stories of survivor bias, because that's not what the world needs. I think we don't need any more inspiration. That becomes frustration. So I'd take it to Catherine. I'd say, Catherine, can you explain this to me? And Catherine explained something that really stopped me in my tracks, a concept called neuroplasticity that many of you may have heard of. Why am I going to explain it when I have an amazing scientist to explain it for me? Excuse me.
Neuroplasticity is basically awesome. It's the ability for the brain to grow new pathways, right? Think of it like branches in a tree. Now, we kind of thought that stopped after you were kids and you couldn't learn anything more. And that's bullshit. You can learn at any point in your life. You just have to make the effort to put your brain into that state where it needs to learn, it wants to learn. It can grow new pathways, and those pathways become habits, become behaviors, become thoughts, become actions. Basically, you can become anyone you want to become.
So I'd heard of neuroplasticity mainly through the story of London cab drivers and that bit of their brain that grows. And I'd always understood that after a certain period of age, usually around your mid-20s, synaptic growth stops and our brain development stops. There are two states known in neuroscience for the last 8 years that drive neuroplasticity. One is psychedelics, which again, 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, we could go for. It's that kind of world. Or secondly, uncertainty. Prolonged exposure in uncertainty drives and evidenced neuroplasticity. So what Carl said, you know, the pliability of uncertainty that allows you to do more and see more and be more is there in these different states. And I'm well into a bit of mushrooms and meditation, but I don't always have time for it. So what we begin to see is that there are lessons in these times of uncertainty. There are opportunities for growth in these times of uncertainty. If we can down-regulate our emotional response to it in sickness and then raise our awareness and our information gathering, because this high arousal also makes our brains put into their optimum state for learning. Again, it's been proven by Yale University. When you're panicking, it's one of the best times to go and get information. So I'm going to have to jump us ahead, but there's a last question to here that we're going to reflect on from Carl. What can we do then? You know, if we're going to believe Carl and Catherine that embracing uncertainty is going to allow us to become more pliable in uncertainty and better at it and allow growth, what are you going to do in your life now to go and embrace uncertainty? Right, now I'm going to have to take a slight decourse because I got too excited and I've put in too much stuff and now I've run out of time. So a couple of takeaways, and then you'll have to finish the questions yourself, and I will send Joe some links. Tom says, just keep going. All right, Tom, yeah, shall we just keep going? What does Joe say? Joe says, keep going. All right, we'll just keep going. Fine, I'm happy to run over a little bit. And if, oh yeah, he's going to record it anyway, so if you can't keep going, then you just catch later. All right, fine, we'll just keep going. Fine. Good. Who wants to be constrained by such things as time or rules? Okay. I, by this point, was beginning to realize that I might be, yeah, embrace the uncertainty. Fuck it, I'm just going to go make some coffee. I might be onto something. And I was beginning to, whilst I was in this horrible emotional financial nosedive, I was telling these stories in sessions like this, and I'd made this technology, there's kind of this green screen in my kitchen, and having some fun with it and feeling like I'd got something that was maybe going to be a little bit useful and possibly I could sell in the future. And I'd had 3,500 people come through these workshops, and I'd asked everyone what the negative impacts of uncertainty were on their lives. And I had hundreds of responses, and I tried to categorize them. They very neatly fell into three things. People talk about being scared and panic and anxiety. It all fell into fear. People talked about exhaustion, confusion, indecision, all went into the fog. And they talked about stuckness and meh and listlessness. And I put it all in stasis. And it really captured everything. Like, this is the human, and I know there's lots said about the economic impact of uncertainty, lots talked about business, but this seemed to me to sum up the huge. It's all right, Lisa, don't worry, I'll use the link again in a second for the type form. But what I was hearing from a lot of organizations were saying, right, you know, it's been a year of pandemic, it's been however long it's been, we need to get people, we need to get focus, we need to get momentum. And that's understandable, right? Because a lot of businesses were tanking. I was having a tough time. So I understood the clients who were coming back and saying this. But it's difficult, right? If the truth is you're showing up to meetings fucking scared, then it's not always appropriate to talk about how we collaborate better on a Teams call. You know, we were jumping in some instances too far. You know, how do we get into asynchronous working? I need to just get better at sleeping. Like, this experience is wearing me thin. So can we deal with that first? And unless we deal with these human aspects of it, you know, the psychological safety, yes, it does take time. How are we going to deal with the also reality of so many clients? I mean, it is an actual reality that we need to move through these things. So what I began to observe, and the questionnaires, you say, don't worry, dudes, we'll have the QR code come back up. And don't worry if you've got to drop off, there's a recording. So it's all, oh, Kelsey, I'm really pleased that this is helping articulate and understand why we leave less our jobs. Me too. Anyway, what people were talked about was that through these stories that I was sharing in the science, we could begin to see why fear is a necessary thing. People without fear don't do very well. But instead of letting fear be something that holds us back, it can be something that drives us forward. Fear works in terms of momentum. Fog is scary and confusing, but if we lean into it, it's air cover for creativity. And this story began to emerge from people going through the workshops I was running. If you're not taking a risk now, if you're not trying something really different, you're going to probably regret it. And the way that we kept seeing out of stasis was people rediscovering the the trust in themselves, and particularly belief in themselves and belief in others. Like, we might not know what to do, but I know that I'm with a smart bunch of people on this call right now, and probably together we can work out a plan. And that began to move us. So Catherine then put that together, this fear, fog, and stasis framework, with 3 big scientific constructs. And we began to realize we were on something. It was too much to fit into a session, as you've seen, I'm unable to do. So we broke it into what we called 3 episodes, because we didn't want to present it as online learning or as a series of workshops. And we decided that because we had these lovely documentary-like interviews that I've been recording, that we'd present it as an interactive, immersive documentary. And that was how Uncertainty Experts was born. We would run the episodes at the beginning of the week, and then over the course of the week, we'd release the full interviews as podcasts. We'd have kind of WhatsApp groups. I'd share everyone that came on the program, all the research papers that I'd read, and just everyone dived into it, because it was like we were discovering something about ourselves. In fact, the review that we got in Time Out, which I loved, was, "It's the most interesting documentary I've ever seen." Why? Because halfway through you realize it's about you. And it was like, that's exactly what we were trying to get to. And then once I was onto this strand, and I'm going to show you 2 last Uncertainty Experts, and then we'll wrap up. They began to make more and more sense of the whole thing for me. And the one that really just changed my entire outlook on the world, and I thoroughly recommend you look her up properly, is Dr. Vivian Ming. Dr. Vivian Ming began life as a young man, quite depressed, huge intellect, and couldn't reconcile those 2 things, knowing how full of potential he was, but unable to recognize it. And this led to depression, and then homelessness, and then living for a prolonged period in a car with a gun in the dashboard, waiting to end it all. Luckily, an intervention was made. Dr. Ming went to Stanford, got recruited by the CIA, basically invented animojis that are on your phone as his facial recognition software, still unhappy, heading towards marriage, revealed to his wife that the challenge he really wanted to face up to was his desire to go through gender transition. His wife supported him in doing so, and now Dr. Vivian Ming and the 2 women have a daughter and a very happy family. And Dr. Ming has fully realized her potential in the world and is doing incredible things as a computational neuroscientist, just rated by Forbes and the Financial Times as one of the top 10 LGBT plus leaders in the world, full stop. And just an incredible story, and does the most incredible work on all sorts of different levels. But what was so useful and helpful for me was that core to all of Dr. Ming's work is the benefits of embracing uncertainty, and how brilliantly she explains how this has been a fundamental component to human success throughout history, our ability to creatively deal with the unknown. And like I say, 2 last Uncertainty Experts, but I'll let Dr. Ming put herself in her own words.
These are the skills that prepare us for the unknown. I mentioned this word before, meta-learning, learning to learn. If you asked me right now, the world is very uncertain. We're entering this decade of uncertainty. Please, Dr. Ming, what is the one skill my child should know when they grow up? And I bet the most common answers people will give is they should learn about AI, they should learn STEM skills, they should learn how to program. No, that's insane. How would anyone know what they should know in 10 years? The only person that could answer that question is them 10 years from now. Start with small experiences of uncertainty, but genuine ones. Find things that you cannot take full control of, but which aren't so threatening to you, or which you are so invested in that failure would be a disaster, or at least in your head, a disaster. So start small with those and build and grow from there. I think one of the things that's really clear from our research, and again, covers huge numbers of data points across millions of people, is that those few that really break through this, that are able to find that they can reach some point of creative honesty and comfort with uncertainty, it isn't just because one day they literally tore this enormous Band-Aid off, or took all the pads off and just went out there without protection. It was that they'd actually slowly walked in to the deep end of their life.
Lucky for me, in making a show like this, that they were also beautifully poetic, weren't they? So those of you who are still with us, this is your penultimate reflection. Dr. Ming knows her stuff. This is a computational neuroscientist who works with millions upon millions of points of data sets, saying that the #1 indicator of long-term life outcomes is our ability to creatively deal with the unknown. And the best way to do that is to daily continue to walk slowly into the deep end of our life. And I just love how subjective and wonderful that is. So I would like to give you a few seconds to reflect on what the deep end of your life is, so that you know how to navigate towards it. And as with all the reflections, it's about instinct. They're all anonymized. You'll be the only people who see your own responses before they'll be taken away and deleted. And then to wrap up. So all of this was amazing. It was really fun. It was incredibly interesting. And I was seeing some really significant responses and hearing great stories. UCL had got more and more excited about it, and I'd started working more closely with their decision-making in uncertainty laboratory. That's a real thing. And they applied a bunch of measures. So we asked people that were going through the program to take a series of assessments. And I didn't know what they were, and I'm the least academic person that you've ever met. So thank you very much, Lisa, for suggesting this was a doctoral level presentation. That's great. And thank you for all the nice comments as well. I do really appreciate that. And what this meant was, what these numbers mean, is that we achieved a statistically significant increase on every single metric that was being recorded. I had no idea. This made it one of the most successful psychological interventions that some of the researchers had ever worked on. Positive association with uncertainty went up. People could begin to see that it could be exciting. Their comfort levels with ambiguity, your ability to stay with an unknown answer. You know, imagine what that does for our creativity. Our preference for predictability. Well, that's just innovation, right? In another way. All of these huge shifts began to take place. And this is just by an elongated version of the process that you're going on, this reflection in response to these unusual points of inspiration and these recommendations, these practical recommendations as to how we go about it. The long response from the PhD who led the research was the long response from a PhD, so, you know, dense, but very positive. And you can read the full summary report that we put together. And the short version was, it was like CBT in a documentary. I think it was Neil earlier on making that point of reference. And that just made me so happy, because we touched on something that was accessible, that was entertaining, as you guys have been reflecting, but that was beginning to have these kind of consequential benefits. And then the thing that annoyed me most was my final interview was with a Zen Buddhist. Now, I love a bit of Zen Buddhism, but they're also a bit bloody annoying because they're always right. And I wanted this to be rooted in science, god damn it, and not mindfulness. And I thought I was onto something brand new and like, this is going to be so useful. And this is Dean Donalds. He's an uncertainty expert. He was adopted by his Jamaican parents aged 1 year old to an all-white family and foster home in 1980s. This is Britain, Middle England. And he grew up in a very racist and violent world. To escape racism and violence, he joined the army and discovered more racism and violence. And a very angry, challenging man grew up. To escape this, finally, he discovered Zen Buddhism. And took to it so well, and it changed his life so fundamentally. He ended up becoming, and he's the only light carrier of his order, so he's one of the highest monks, sorry, that's not the right thing, in the order of Thich Nhat Hanh, who died very sadly 3 weeks ago, in the world. So he's, you know, he's a white wizard, basically, of Zen Buddhism. And we're going to finish on a reflection from him, but I'm going to back it up with a scientific observation from Catherine before we wrap. And what then pleased me so much was that once Dean really introduced me to the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh and Zen Buddhism, is how closely it correlates to cutting edge neuroscience. The conclusions are the same. 2,500-year-old Zen wisdom, that the only certainty in life is impermanence, and our ability to reconcile with that will determine the happiness of our life, sits exactly and squarely with the science of uncertainty. But let Dean sum it up himself.
So I breathe in. And then I breathe out. And there's that pause in between the breath, isn't there? There's that pause in between the breathing in, pause, and the breathing out. And if you can live in that moment and that moment and that moment, that is where the creativity takes place. That is where the bond between the racist and the victim of racism can come together. When you both can pause, when you can both see something very different, which you might not be able to articulate. So a lot of Zen retreats are in silence, are in total silence, because we're doing that. We're living in that pause. We're living in that moment of interconnection with everything that is. And if we can prolong that, if we can consistently live in that moment and that moment and that moment, which are all uncertain, which are not solid, then there's a chance to do something different.
Okay.
And the chance to do something different is why we're all here, right? Surely that's the meta brief that we're all working on. And certainly it's the brief the world wants us to be working on. And so, again, as with my ex-prisoners and convicts and addicts and activists and refugees and homeless, I wanted to know why this worked. And somebody had said earlier on about the mindfulness aspect of it. And Catherine could extol profoundly on why mindfulness works in the brain and what takes place. And I'll give her the final words in a 30-second clip about something I'd never heard of called metacognition. But it's what takes place if we practice the kind of techniques that Dean is talking about.
Metacognition, it's pretty basic. It's just our ability to be aware of our own thoughts, which sometimes we do naturally and sometimes we don't. And the problem is if we don't, we let loads of things go through our brain subconsciously and affect the way we behave. By being more conscious about how we're thinking and learning how we think, we can then change it. And they've shown scientifically that people who are better at being aware of their own thoughts, and it's something we teach through the series, through self-reflection, then make better decisions.
So one of the key ways that you can increase metacognition is, well, meditation, obviously. But one of the ways that everybody else can do it is asking ourselves good questions, deep questions, questions that activate our instincts. So the final reflection for today is this. What do you already know, but you're only going to realize sometime in the next 6 months? Because you haven't admitted it yet, because part of you is denying it, because it's still processing. Your body's worked it out. Some part of you knows it, but your brain hasn't. And just read the question once and then sit with it. I'll shut up for a few seconds and see what your instinct tells you. Okay, my friends. One of the key things that we learned and observed as we came out of this was a transformation of failure, of fear and failure. This whole moment in time is one that presents fear to all of us. And everybody spoke about fear of failure being one of their greatest fears. And then as we progressed through the series, we talked about regrets. One of the number one things that everyone said they didn't want to regret was missed opportunities in life. And when we begin to present these parallels, which is what uncertainty and embracing uncertainty allows us to do, we begin to reframe everything. So even though the majority of people could identify fear of failure being their greatest fear, almost the same amount could identify missed opportunities, the regret they most wanted to avoid. And we can begin to see, in embracing these paradoxes, how we can reduce our sense of failure and move past it. And the same thing happened around action and avoidance. The majority of people could recognize that in response to uncertainty, they had an avoidant behavior. The wine we were joking about at the beginning, the doom scrolling, the whatever it is. But once we realized this, the majority could recognize they had nothing to gain from it. And by the end of the series, the vast majority could recognize that embracing uncertainty brought them benefits. And the vast majority, 99%, could report that some action always felt better than avoidance. And I know that's a deep simplification, but it's fucking true. And when we put it all into place, we will begin to change the way we feel about uncertainty. And so you can finish up by putting in your score now. And, I'm not expecting scientific shifts to take place, but what does seem to take place is even with an hour spent in reflection on unusual stories, we begin to shift a little bit. After that, if you put in your email, you'll get the results from today. We've developed a capture mechanism with Typeform. They're all anonymized, they're deleted, and we then keep the insights because it helps us build the program. You'll get your reflections immediately, and a link to take the uncertainty tolerance score, and actually a link to the best article I've seen about wanting to do something amidst the uncertainty of the Ukraine, and some very practical recommendations as to what you can go and do. And that, my friends, is me 13 minutes over of that, telling you the story of how we built the world's first and only interactive and immersive documentary, scientifically proven to increase your tolerance to uncertainty. Tickets on sale now. Thanks very much indeed. And I know we're over, but I can stick around for 10 more minutes if anyone's got questions, or I can leave you to go back to your Wednesdays.
Mate, thank you very, very much. So I have this thing, and folks from the community probably would have heard this before from time to time, and it's when I get nervous and stuff like that I come to a presentation and it's with someone who I think is amazing, like you, and I sit there and my shoulders go tense, and I stand there and probably for the first 20 minutes to a half an hour, I feel they feel tense like that, and then someone says something, and then I can feel my shoulders relax, and I almost call it my shoulders relax moment. I stop putting someone on a pedestal. I start listening to what they say, and it changes my world just a little bit. Today, I almost feel like I actually literally felt my legs starting to relax. I'm sure the community, I'm projecting here now somewhat, but I'm sure the community would have seen through my tone and messaging and stuff like that I haven't been dealing particularly well with the uncertainty of these past few days. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for that, because it was a really amazing session and something that is really well captured in the chat feature right there. So thank you sincerely. Really, really great. Honestly, there's a few questions left in the Q&A, but I think they've largely been captured over the course of the talk, and you've also been phenomenal at answering and interacting with the community throughout the duration of today's session. So actually what I want to do is probably just give folks the opportunity to reflect on the talk rather than go into a big Q&A right now, and really just encourage everyone to sort of get in touch and say thank you to you as well, Sam, for today's session, because I know that you would have helped a lot of people. So I think that's it really, other than just to say thank you very much, and if that's okay with you, we'll call it there.
Absolutely fine with me. I've really enjoyed it, and I can tell you, because I've just opened the Typeform, that it's quite a significant shift, that the group went from an average of 5.1 all the way to 7.7. So that's like a 50% increase in our immediate scores on uncertainty. So something's working. So thank you very much for joining in, everyone. I really appreciate it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you to everyone for watching as well today. Honestly, these experiences don't happen with all of you, and I can see so much gratitude coming in for everyone in the chat feature right now. So it's just wicked. So don't open your emails straight away. Take a moment just to think about this. And we'll go from there. So Sam, thank you very much. Thank you so much to the community. Enjoy today. That was phenomenal. And, say thank you to everyone. Be grateful.